Welcome to How to Cook That. I'm Reardon, and in this episode I thought we would debunk some of the healthy dessert recipes that are on TikTok and YouTube. I get so many requests for healthy dessert recipes and there's so much conflicting information out there for people, so I thought we would look at some of them and have a look specifically at the sugars and sugar alternatives that they're using in the recipes so we can talk through what's what and explain what's going on. Firstly, let's start with agave nectar. This seemed like it was everywhere a few years ago. Every healthy dessert recipe had it in.
2 tablespoons of agave nectar.
1.5 cups agave nectar in this.
Add 2 tablespoons of agave nectar.
So why was everybody using agave nectar? What were the claims about it?
Agave nectar is low glycemic and really easy to use.
The high fructose content in agave can have some undesirable health effects.
One of the biggest reasons that I'm a fan of agave syrup is simply the fact that it's right in the sweet spot when it comes to the glycemic index.
Agave nectar is probably the least healthy, most health-washed sweetener on the planet.
So this is why it's confusing. Some say it's really good, others say it's terrible. Which is it? Well, let's break down those claims first. The first one said that it's low glycemic index or low GI. If you've never heard of glycemic index, don't worry, you'll be an expert after the next couple of minutes. What the glycemic index is they give a group of people 50 grams of carbohydrate from one source. So in this case, 50 grams of carbohydrate from agave nectar. They then measure their blood glucose reading over the next 2 hours so they can graph how quickly it goes up or how slowly it goes up and then comes back down. They then compare that graph to the graph the same people get when they're given 50 grams of straight glucose. Now, glucose is a very simple form of sugar. Let's say, for example's sake, that this blue Lego brick is glucose. When glucose is eaten, it goes into the stomach and then into the intestine where it doesn't need digesting or breaking down. It's already in a very simple form. We can't break that down anymore. So now it's going to go into the bloodstream where it can be used by the body for energy because we use glucose in our cells for all sorts of processes. So that's the fastest way to get your blood glucose up, is to eat straight plain glucose because it goes directly into your bloodstream. So that gets the glycemic index of 100 and everything else is scored compared to that on a comparison to straight glucose. So what would happen if we ate agave nectar? And what happens if we eat straight sugar? Well, to show you a comparison, I've put a blood glucose continuous monitor into my arm, which I thought would really, really hurt. But it didn't hurt at all, and I can't even tell it's there. But the advantage of that means I can just use an app on my phone, and when I want to know my blood glucose reading, I can just scan the little sensor on my arm and it will tell you my blood glucose reading so that I don't have to continually do finger prick tests over the 2 hours to get the graph for you. So I'll start with the agave nectar. So this is 20 grams of carbohydrate from the agave nectar. So I'm going to eat this and then measure my blood glucose over the next 2 hours so I can show you the graph of what happens. And then I'll do the same with sugar and we'll have a chat about it. So here is my blood glucose over 2 hours for agave nectar. And you can see that it's hardly gone up at all. So why is that? Why did my blood glucose not just shoot right up when I ate that really sweet, sugary substance? That's because it is low GI. The reason it's low GI is if we look at agave nectar, it's made up, the majority of it, of fructose, not glucose. So if glucose is this blue brick, fructose is going to be this red brick. They're very, very, very similar in structure to each other, but they're not the same. So let's say that we eat this. It goes into our stomach and then our intestines. It doesn't need breaking down because it's already a simple sugar. It can get absorbed straight away into the bloodstream. And now we've got lots of fructose in our bloodstream, but it's not glucose. So the glucose monitor is only telling us how much glucose is in our bloodstream. So that's not going to show up at all because it's fructose. Now, our cells can't just use fructose just like that. So that means it's got to go to the liver for processing to make it into something useful. In the liver, it can get converted into glucose so that we can use it. Or if you have a large amount, and I'm meaning lots of it, in studies where they gave people, humans, 25% of their calorie intake from fructose, then you will convert it into fat. So triglycerides and cholesterol, and that is going to up those levels in your blood, and that then increases your risk of heart attack, and that is not a good thing. So despite the fact that it is low GI because it doesn't have much straight glucose in it, it's not ideal because it's so high in fructose, and high amounts of fructose are not good for us because they've got to be processed in the liver. A little bit of fructose is fine. So if you're having fructose, for example, in your fruit, totally fine. But if you're starting to concentrate that down and have huge sources of fructose, like in high fructose corn syrup, in soft drinks, in this sort of thing, that's just going to give us way too much, and it's not going to be good for us. So how does that compare to straight sugar? Well, I'm going to eat 20 grams of straight sugar for you so that we can then see exactly what that's like and what that does to my blood sugars. I can think of so many more enjoyable ways to have sugar than eating straight sugar. The things I do for you. You can see on this graph my blood sugar spiked up fairly quickly and then also dropped back down very quickly. The rapid rise meant that we released lots of insulin into the blood to store all that glucose, and then it dropped back down. So what is normal sugar made of? Is that made of glucose or is that made of fructose? Well, it's actually made of sucrose, and sucrose is a glucose and a fructose joined together. So what happens when you eat that is it goes into your stomach and then into your intestine, and there's enzymes in your intestine that break that down, split it up into fructose and glucose. That then gets absorbed, and the glucose can be used straight away or stored as glycogen, and the fructose, of course, has to go to the liver for processing. The other thing a lot of people don't understand about the glycemic index, they go, oh, low glycemic index, that means it's healthy or that means it's good. But there's other things you have to consider, which is you don't usually eat agave nectar or plain sugar just on its own. Well, that guy does, and I just did, and you would if you had it in your coffee. But apart from that, it's usually mixed in with other things. I'm going to choose one of the healthy recipes that has virtually no other carbs in it apart from the agave nectar, and I'm going to make it once using agave nectar and once using sugar, and then I'm going to eat the same amount of each one, and I'm going to wait 2 hours in between so that I can test the blood glucose levels and show you what happens. This is the blood glucose graph for when I had the agave nectar, and you can see that it went up a little bit but hardly at all, which is to be expected because this is low GI. There was hardly any other carbs in the recipe. So that's what you'd think would happen. Next, if I eat the same amount of the one with sugar in it, this is what happens. See how there's no massive spike? It goes up slightly, a little bit more than the agave nectar one, but not a lot. It's going up slowly. So why is that? Well, there's two reasons. One is the glycemic load, which is how much of it are you eating. So there's not as much in the piece of that I had as there was when I just ate 20 grams of straight sugar. The other is there's other ingredients in there. For example, the nuts, they were very high in fat, and fat slows down food getting out of your stomach. It sits in your stomach for quite a bit longer, which is going to slow down that digestion and release of all the sugars into your bloodstream. So the combination of different foods can really affect what the overall glycemic effect of what you eat is. So should you swap all your white sugar in baking for agave nectar? Would that be healthier for you? No, if you're still eating the same amount of it for you, it's not healthier for you. It's got to go to your liver for processing. And if you're having a large amount of it, it is not going to be good for you. Small amount, it won't matter which one you use. Large amount, you'd actually be better off with that one. Even the fans of agave nectar have now seemed to change their mind.
I'm a fan of agave syrup.
It is, quite honestly, it's kind of a sham. They market it as low glycemic index so that people buy it thinking it's healthy, but it will make you a lot more fat. Honestly, it just has that effect. So try to avoid that.
I used to use a lot of agave because I really like the flavor. And yes, it's low on the glycemic index, but it turns out that agave nectar has a ton of fructose in it. Actually, almost the same amount of fructose that white refined sugar has.
Actually, agave nectar has a lot more fructose in it than normal sugar does. If we look at the graph of them side by side, white sugar is half glucose, half fructose. High fructose corn syrup has a little bit less glucose and a bit more fructose, and agave nectar has even less glucose and even more fructose. Wouldn't it be great if someone could invent a food that didn't have the fructose, it just had the glucose, but it had it in a way that it was low GI? That'd be awesome. Oh, hang on a minute. that already exists. In starchy foods, you have all the glucose molecules joined together. Now, not all starchy foods are low GI. Some are high GI, they're just easy to break down, but others are low GI. Things like pasta, rice noodles, your really grainy breads, they have plenty of starch and they're low GI, and that's a good way to get that into your body. Far better than adding heaps of your agave nectar or sugar into your food. Okay, next.
I am obsessed with coconut sugar.
2 tablespoons coconut sugar.
Start with some coconut sugar.
Then you'll add some coconut sugar. Coconut sugar.
Let's chat the differences.
So as you can see, it is unrefined and low glycemic, which means that it's going to affect your blood sugar levels much differently than a white refined sugar. Coconut sugar also contains all of the minerals that I will put right here. So these are just a few reasons why I like to personally use coconut sugar over white sugar.
It has a huge component to it that I am a big fan of. And that is the fact that coconut sugar contains something called inulin. Inulin is what is called a prebiotic fiber.
If I had to pick my favorite of all of these for health benefits, I would say coconut nectar. The glycemic index of coconut nectar is about 35. It's very natural. It's very organic in its own state. It's got raw enzymes and minerals, so it actually has a lot of great health benefits.
This stuff sounds amazing, hey? Well, let's look at all of those claims. Firstly, low GI. It can have a slightly lower GI than normal sugar if it has fiber in it. But depending how much it's processed, it may not have hardly any fiber in it at all, and therefore its GI is very similar to sugar. So what's it actually made of? What is in your coconut syrup or your coconut sugar? Well, it is made of sucrose, surprise, surprise, exactly the same as normal sugar, which is a glucose and a fructose joined together, and it also has some free, already broken up, glucose and fructose in there. So altogether, it is sugar. It says it on the label, coconut sugar. That's what it is. It's nothing magical about it. The other claims there were
coconut sugar contains something called inulin. Inulin is what is called a prebiotic fiber.
If you had 50 grams of this in a day, which I would not recommend, you'd get less inulin from it than you would if you ate a banana. So eat some fruit and veg as your source of inulin, not coconut sugar. Shouldn't be promoted as a good source of that. Now, the other thing that a lot of people said was that it had lots of minerals in it. So let's take a look at that one.
Coconut sugar also contains all of the minerals that I will put right here.
If you were to eat 4 teaspoons of your coconut nectar or your coconut sugar, you'd get the same amount of iron as you would get from one tiny 10-gram bite of steak. And the iron in the steak would be better absorbed because it's an easier form of iron for your body to absorb and use. So is it a good source of iron? No. Does it have iron in it? Yes, but so does normal sugar. I could start labeling normal sugar with, it contains iron, it contains zinc, it's got minerals in it. But it's not a good source of the minerals. It's got so much sugar in there that it's called empty calories, because you'd have to eat so much of it to get these things that you would be sick if you ate that much of it. As for the other claims of it being natural and raw,
it's very natural.
Those two things don't have any regulation in the food law. So if I'm trying to sell sugar, I can say that this sugar is raw and it's natural to boot. It's sugar. If you really like the taste of it, you could swap some of it. It's no worse for you than normal sugar, but it's no better for you either. All right, before I get on to the next one, let me tell you about today's sponsor, KiwiCo. We have been using KiwiCo crates for years. I really like this company, love their products.
Last month, I got this working safe, which shows you how the locking mechanism works.
They have different categories of crates to cater for all the different ages, from toddlers right through to adults. And he is always excited when a new one arrives. Inside are super cool projects designed to encourage kids to get involved in STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. And the instructions are kid-friendly, and the magazine always has extra content about the theme of that box, so they've been just great in home learning. Everything you need to make the project is included in the box, so you don't need to go to the shops. How cool is that? You can click on the link in the description below to get 50% off your first KiwiCo crate. They really are great, so make sure you check those out. Okay, now moving on to Manuka honey. This one has So many health claims out there.
This is Manuka honey.
Manuka honey, also known as super honey.
Damn, it'll help your immune system.
I like to take a teaspoon a day, and I really have seen improvement in my life.
Honey number 3, it won't spike your blood sugar as quickly.
Also antiviral and anti-inflammatory.
I would go for Manuka honey. It's a little pricier, but it's almost like you're getting medicine.
First of all, let's look at the glycemic index for honey. It is very, very similar to sugar. It's slightly lower, but not enough that you'd notice if you were monitoring your blood glucose. And no, I'm not going to eat 20 grams of honey to show you the comparison. Let's talk about what sugars are in it. It is made up of some glucose and some fructose and some sucrose, which as you now know is a glucose and a fructose joined together, and some maltose, which is a new one for you. It is a glucose and a glucose joined together. So I'll pop that one there. So is honey antibacterial? Should we be eating it to kill all the bacteria in our system? Well, we've got good gut bacteria in there too that we don't want to kill, so I hope not. So where has this study come from? Well, there are lots of studies actually that show if you dilute honey to a dilution of 40% or greater of honey, and then you put it in a petri dish and you add some bacteria, then after 24 hours, certain types of bacteria have been killed. They're not viable anymore. So yes, it does have some antibacterial properties and it is being looked at for the use on wounds and that sort of thing, but that's leaving it for 24 hours in the one spot, and that doesn't happen when we're eating it. Prebiotic fiber. Does it have that in it? Yes, it does, but it's a very small amount. You'd be better off getting it from other foods that are going to give you lots of fiber and be really good for your gut. I wouldn't eat honey to try and improve your gut bacteria. If you were swapping, say, sugar in your tea for honey, it is marginally better for you, but even better would be to get rid of the sugar from the tea altogether. Okay, moving on to the ever popular maple syrup.
These are super healthy, delicious, and easy to make. They make for the perfect summer dessert. 2 tablespoons of pure maple syrup.
Maple syrup. 1/3 cup maple syrup. Maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Maple syrup.
Maple syrup has a very similar glycemic index to normal sugar, so you're not at an advantage there. The types of sugar in it are pretty much the same as your coconut sugar. It's mainly sucrose, so mainly the same as normal white sugar with a little bit of free fructose and glucose in there as well. So it is going to, as you know by now, just going to go into your bloodstream as fructose and glucose. It is still sugar. And yes, it has a tiny bit of starch in there, a tiny bit of some minerals in there, but is that a good source of those things? No, it's not. Is swapping all your sugar for one of these sugar alternatives a good idea? Not really. They're still just sugar. That's not going to make a huge difference to your diet or your health or anything for that matter. Now, I've had so many requests from people saying, can you do a healthy dessert recipe? And my answer is always eat some fruit, eat a fruit salad. Cakes and biscuits and chocolates and things that we make on the channel are treats. They're for special occasions. They are not healthy. They are not good for you. Fruits and vegetables and whole grain cereals, they're good for you. Eat lots of those things. Now, I can't finish this video without talking about straight sugar, the elephant in the room, because everyone, isn't sugar bad for you? Shouldn't we be avoiding it at all costs? Well, let's have a look at some of the claims on straight sugar.
Cane sugar. You guys gotta stay away from this stuff. And I don't care if it's cane sugar, sugar in the raw, turbinado sugar, organic cane sugar. Sugar is the devil, you guys.
What makes you sick and overweight? It's not fat. The answer is sugar. And the average American consumes about 152 pounds of sugar a year.
And there have been so many documentaries and news programs all about sugar, 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 so that everyone is convinced at the moment that sugar is bad, everything else is fine, we can eat as much fat and everything else as we want, it's just sugar, sugar is the problem, which we like to do that as humans. Just make it simple, just one little thing. Don't tell me I have to eat well and exercise. I don't want that. I just want to take one thing out of my diet and replace it with something else that's just as sugary, and then I'll be all good. But it's not how it works. Interestingly, in regard to just trying to reduce sugar, if you look in Australia from 1980 until 2003, as Australia as a whole, our total sugar consumption from all types of sugar, not just from straight sugar, declined 16%. Our obesity rate went up threefold. So just reducing sugar on its own is not the solution. We need to reduce sugar and fatty foods and increase the amount of healthy whole grain breads and cereals, fruit and veggie that we're eating. The number one thing you could do for your diet today is making sure you're getting 5 proper full serves of vegetables every day. And I bet that you're not, because that's a lot of vegetables. If you focus on increasing that first, it helps get everything else into balance. Thank you so much to my patrons for all of your support, allowing me to make these sort of videos. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, let the algorithm know it was good by interacting with it. Make it a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.